evening, everyone. Welcome to our regularly scheduled city council meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and a roll call be completed.
You're waiting for me. Good evening, council members. Councilmember Trong.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember.
Yes, here.
Yes. Councilmember Lewis.
Present.
And not here this evening is Mayor Finley.
Yes. So I am stepping in. I'm a little smaller. They put some extra padding on my seat so I look taller. Oh, anyway, I'd like to ask someone who doesn't know I'm going to ask her. But I saw Amanda Hamilton walk in. I'd love for her to lead us in our pledge to the flag.
Okay, put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Okay, we're now at the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion? You want to say something first?
Please. We found out this evening that the Mayor's Youth Council will not be able to give a presentation, so I would ask the council to pull item 4A from the agenda.
Great, thank you. So with that, do we have an adoption of the agenda? Motion?
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Opposition? So moved. Now we're on to item 4, which is special items. And we're going to go directly to 4B, which is a public safety update.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Get to jump right in there and start off the show. Just to update what's going on. This is part of the monthly update. At the time I wrote this, we were currently down 36.99% Part 1 crimes year to date, which is a great start. A lot of other cities are very jealous and wish they could say they started off the way we did. A lot of them started up, we're down. As of today, we are down only 32.93%, but that's still significant. Granted, it's early, a lot of things can change, but I like the way we're starting. Our special assignment team was challenged by the captain to start working more on community outreach and holding events. So the first event that we put together is on March 16th. That's going to be Coffee with a Deputy. That'll be at our Starbucks right there at Huntington and Buena Vista. We decided to do an afternoon event to capture different people than the last time we did morning, so it'll be from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And again, that's on March 16th. Moving on into Measure H and outreach coordination. Today, I did, in public safety, Sergeant Beeler and myself conducted homeless training for all city staff. Just really the do's and don'ts and what we can do. Going back in history, all the way back from maybe 109 and Prop 47 and 57 to our district attorney Gascon, to Measure H, to our abandoned property policy. You name it, we covered it. And I think it was some good training for them. As part of that, you know, we had a case study and we were trying to provide case studies as it relates to Gascon and just the changes in the courts and everything else. And one of those was one of our everybody probably has seen him and knows him, but our 6'4", 6'5" male black guy who likes to run around naked on Buena Vista and Huntington or in women's clothing. And, you know, he's been arrested several times. I believe to date it was 6. And it was starting all the way back from last summer, which is when he first popped up on our screen and decided that Doherty was his favorite place. So since July 3rd of 21, he had his first assault with a deadly weapon charge that wasn't with a firearm. That case was rejected because the victims didn't want to prosecute. Then October 12th, 21, he had another assault with a deadly weapon, not a firearm. Again, those victims didn't want to prosecute,
I'm sorry, did you say firearm?
but not with a firearm.
Okay.
Assault with deadly weapon, not a firearm. On November 10th, 21, he had a felony vandalism. I can't recall what it is he vandalized, but it was to the tune of more than $900. On November 26th, another felony vandalism. On January 7th, criminal threats. That he actually went to court with, received time served and probation. So since January 7th, he's been on probation. And then I think that was the one where actually he was up on the big lots and we had to have fire come and everyone else and talk him down. And then on February 11th, he had an assault with a deadly weapon and then 2 charges of felony vandalism as he jumped on 2 cars and threw something through the McDonald's window, and then jumped on the Starbucks trash receptacle container area and basically had to be talked down. So with all of that, they were all reduced to a misdemeanor charge. He got 60 days in jail, but with good time, work time credits, he will be out on March 7th. So probably do about 1/3 of the time. So those are just some of the areas and pitfalls and things that we deal with. I know a lot of people talk about, law enforcement's doing nothing. Well, that goes towards DA Gascon's policy. Because as you know, he wrote a policy the day he got into office that took effect the day after he was in office. And that directive to all assistant DAs was, you will reject all prosecution of trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, criminal threats, public intoxication, loitering, drug possession, and under the influence of a controlled substance. Were they written specifically for homeless? No, but those are the gambit of everything that homeless are arrested for. And so none of those charges are being prosecuted. To this date, as from 1 year from when he took office to now, Temple Station has seen 937 cases rejected as a result of this directive. Not all of them Doherty, but several of them. And I think I saw today that his own office of Assistant District Attorneys voted 97.9% to support a recall of him, and that was with an 83.3% voter turnout. So when your own people that you work and for, really, because you work for them and you're their boss, have no faith in you, the system might be broken. Well, yeah, so, to date, I also was looking at how many cities have voted a no confidence in regards to Mr. Gascon, and it's 26 to date out of the 88. Whether or not it's a moot point or a point worth considering, that's something for council to decide. We're definitely moving down the track of recall. They're out there gathering signatures now. There's a lot of money and a lot of big names out behind it, so we'll see what happens. He's supported by George Soros, so I think eventually they might get enough signatures, but a recall could be coming down the road. I know that went a little bit off tangent into everything else that's going on. Tonight is also the last homeless count, so Tony's over there with Irwindale trying to put that together. We are coordinating that with Irwindale in support of LASA. And let's see, on the riverbed, Azusa is in the process of trying to put together a clean out of their areas north of Huntington Drive. Hopefully that will be conducted in the next few months, but I know they're working on it. And that is all I have. Are there any questions for me?
Questions?
I have some questions.
Ms. Schultz?
Yes, hi. Thanks, Brian, for that. So, several questions come to mind. I'm not sure even where to start. So, we have all of these rejections of each of the things that you listed, and I'm just curious, what can we do then? So if that policy was done on day one with whatever intent, what can we do then to make sure that we don't have all of these things happening in our community? That's the first question.
No, that's a good question. You got the city of Whittier and other cities looking at hiring their own prosecutor to prosecute misdemeanors, and it's solely because of this. The district attorney's office is not prosecuting these misdemeanor charges, and that's why they're doing that. You know, whether or not we go down that road, you know, I think we're coming to a point where there's enough pressure on Gascon, or eventually he'd be recalled. You know, we'll get back to that. In the meantime, the Sheriff's Department continues to arrest. They'll continue to book him down at Temple Station. They'll continue to give him a citation because it is a misdemeanor, so they are cited out after the process. And we'll continue to do that. And whether it's rejected or not, that's on the district attorney. Multiple offender of the same charge, then eventually he will prosecute. I don't know what that number is, but we're going to try and get to it. So we will continue to do our job, and we will continue, whether or not they prosecute or not, until the point where it is he does have to prosecute.
And do we know if this person has a nexus to Doherty?
He does not.
He does or does not?
He does not. He just likes Gordy.
Okay. And then, do we know what happens when he goes in for the 5150, or like he's serving time now? Can we get any reports about his behavior, about his mental wellness, anything like that regarding this individual? And the reason I'm asking is because he continues to wreak havoc on our community. My daughter and my husband walked out of Dollar Store and they're hearing his rants and swearing and, you know, conversations about sexual activity, and my daughter's 10. So I am very much vested in figuring out what we need to do for people who are wreaking havoc on our community, and specifically impacting the children and our families in this community. So can we find out about what's happening when he's on a 5150, when he's in jail, the kinds of behaviors, so that we can have a more comprehensive picture of this individual, so that when it's time for him to be on the streets and we need him to move on to protect our community, we have some sort of data and comprehensive report about him?
There are HEPA laws that govern just exactly what you're talking about that are not discoverable even in a county jail. He was not 5150, he was arrested. There's a difference. 5150 is a 72-hour hold based on somebody either wants to hurt themselves, danger others, or so gravely disabled they can't take care of themselves. He does not fit that criteria. He likes to smoke methamphetamine. He goes on a manic episode and creates havoc. So we could look at restraining orders. That has been done on some homeless. I think we can prove and get to that point maybe. I will discuss that. You know, Sergeant Fiedler and I were discussing that that's potentially something as a city we might want to do if he decides to return to the city of Doherty when he's released on his projected release date of March 7th.
Okay, I would like to find out more about that specifically for this individual, because I actually was there at the Starbucks this past time, and I've actually seen him on several occasions with the Big Lots and such, and, you know, walking in the middle of the street, which is unsafe for him and for our community. So whatever we can do to try and figure out how to keep our community safe, I would like to do and try to support. I'd also like to find out, so is he able to, so is the sheriff, what is the sheriff's, you know, with his big cowboy hat trying to do about this? Because that's one of the things I heard was his big thing. And so I'd like to find out more about that and see how we can partner better with the sheriff's department if we need to, or take whatever route we need to for that, if that's the only thing we can do. If we can just find out more information about that. And I would love for either the sheriff, actually both, and Mr. Gascon to come and talk to us about this sometime. I think both of those would be great people that we could learn a lot from and try to partner with. So I don't know if that's possible, but that's a request.
Only invite him.
Okay.
Probably not at the
DA
same time.
Gascon didn't even attend his own assistant district attorney association meeting, so we'll see if he attends one of ours.
Well, I'd love to know when we do invite them and the response or lack of response, because I want our community to know that we're behind them in keeping us all safe. And so we're trying to have the same support from the leaders in our state and in our county. So So thank you very
You're
much,
welcome.
Brian.
And I will say, what the sheriff is doing, and the cops team, there's not enough of them. And that's just the bottom line. I mean, there are, I think, less than 12 for the whole county, from Antelope Valley to the beach, so, but they did train our deputies at Temple Station, they trained our Doherty deputies. They don't have any other secrets that we're not already using. So we're doing everything under our power. Like I said, that's why we've been kind of spitballing and, potentially looking towards maybe a restraining order. So we're very cognizant that Mr. Smith, and that's his name, is a problem and a hazard and a detriment to the community. So we're working on it.
And I value our sheriffs. I mean, Sergeant Fielder knows that, all of the sheriffs that we have here in our community, I know that they do the best they can. And so part of this ask is in support of them as well. So thank you so much
You're welcome.
to both of you for this.
Thank you.
Mr. King?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm just curious, Brian, and I concur with what Councilwoman Schultz had said too. I go and patronize that Starbucks almost daily. Craig can attest to that. Last time I was there, we saw another homeless. They're frequent flyers. Having a cart over there. They were not being combative, but that day was a good day. They were not smoking any kind of meth, right? They were not under any kind of influence. It really brought up to the notion that I have is, are there a lot of drug dealers all over the city right now? I mean, what is it? How are they procuring these kind of drugs? And I do recall that when I was walking around the riverbed all the time, I do see cars and there are people, there are spotters. How are these people obtaining, and have access to all these whatever drugs that they have? How are they getting them? Do we have a better understanding on this?
There is some activity in the riverbed. There is a location within the city that we're working on, but it's not rampant where they're all over the place. They do have to work and find it, and find somebody, but, that's, when you have all day, that's all you have to do. Where there's a will, there's a way. And again, it's kind of systemic. I mean, yes, a lot of them are substance abuse, narcotics abuse, mental health issues, and sometimes they go in tandem. But, we're kind of in this area where there are no programs and there's no going to jail and there's no drug court and there's no services. So will we get back to that? Yeah. But, this is the time and place where we kind of have a revolving door with no help. I think help will get here. It just, I don't know when. We see these cycles all the time from, early 90s when three strikes went and everybody's tough on crime to now we want to let everybody out. Well, I think it's swinging back the other way right now, and that's the opinion, because we're tired of seeing on the news people being attacked and pushed in trains, stabbed by homeless, and everything else, murder rates going up. But again, don't fret. We're doing well in Doherty. So, we always work on having a plan and staying ahead of what's going on.
Yeah, hopefully the pendulum will swing back to
It
the
will.
other side, right?
It
So
will.
I think that's what's
It takes a
happening in
little
New York
time.
City.
Yeah.
The guy used to be a cop, and he was a cop, and now he's just arresting everyone. It's so unsafe. I mean, you have that woman, unfortunately, she got pushed into not the hell, but their subway, right?
Yep.
It's so sad, and you seeing these kind of people, they need help, and we're not giving them any kind of help. It's really, really sad to see our nation, the best nation, and we want to go ahead and fight everyone around the world. We don't want to go ahead and help people here in the United States. They're U.S. citizens. It just bothers me. And one thing I want to go ahead and talk about really quick is, I noticed what I heard from Azusa is that they're able to go ahead and get a police substation at their coal line station proximity around that area. And I noticed when I'm driving at night, seldom, I wouldn't say all the time, but seldom I would go ahead and see some, homeless folks that would get off at our station and just start walking. Is there and I talked to a whole bunch of, elected officials from all over San Diego Valley. Is there something we can do a little bit more vigilant to say, hey, you know what, don't come to Deloitte? I don't know. I'm just curious.
No. We are not taking that one on.
At least I tried. It's sad, it's really sad that we're property, the taxpayers and what happened, a few years back with all these fires that we were experiencing and had to do with, one homeless camp wanted to go and burn and camp out over a stolen bike. It probably was my bike. It just bothers me. It's like we gotta help these people, but at the same time, we, the property taxpayers, are not able to go ahead and get help. And it's hurting everyone. It's just hurting everyone.
I'd say that when it comes time to vote, you gotta read through the propositions carefully, because when you have Proposition 47 that was titled Safe Schools, Safe Streets Act, that's a total mischaracterization of what it did. When you got Prop 57, which said Public Safety and Prison Realignment Act, that's a mischaracterization. There was no public safety to be had. And when they sign an AB 109 or GASCON provides these directives, they're elected officials and they don't feel the pressure and they feel they can do it and they are doing it. So Gascon ran on what he's doing. Exactly. He didn't lie. He said exactly what he's going to do and he did it. And people voted him in. So, we all have to do our due diligence when we vote. And eventually, like I said, it'll swing back. It's already, the public opinion's already starting to swing back towards, hopefully we get to a place in the middle.
Are there any other comments or questions? Mr. Lewis?
How you doing, Brian?
Doing good.
I was just wondering, is there any way that maybe, the county won't prosecute? Is there any way maybe you can get a federal prosecution against them?
Well, it wouldn't be federal because it's at the state level, and that's why some of the cities like Whittier are looking at hiring their own city prosecutor, because that's really what it is to prosecute those crimes. We can look down that path, but that's what, council wants to direct, and it's costly.
Yes.
You know.
What about like maybe reaching out to a different county to get some assistance from a different county? Could you?
It has to
do that?
stay within the local
Jurisdiction? Okay.
Like I said, we'll put pressure on, because in that directive, it did say, if they're a multiple offender of the same crime, that they will eventually prosecute. We're gonna hit that threshold and make them make that choice to prosecute, so we'll get there.
Yeah, but 6, come on, 6.
Well, those were all felonies. Those were felonies, and they
Six
dropped
should
them
be
to
enough.
misdemeanors, but those didn't fit the criteria of his directive. We have others that are getting there, but he's a rare individual.
Well, I think I'll just suggest that you can follow up with Mr. Villalobos and our public safety office, or even Captain Fiedler. So, Sergeant.
Way to promote him, though.
Wait, what was that? I'm sorry.
I said, way to promote him.
Oh, see? So, yeah, he'll respond to your call then. All right, thanks so much. Any other, okay, we're gonna move on. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Move on to item 4C, which is the CityNet homeless census presentation.
I'm going to do the introduction of you. He's very excited. This is Matt Bates. He's the Vice President of CityNet. The city contracted with CityNet in October using some of our Measure H funds. And this is for a census, which is a little bit different than a point-in-time count, which is what you all know is happening this evening. A point-in-time count is literally one night, a group of volunteers goes out and we get a little snapshot in time of how many unhoused there are in the city. A census is more like an in-depth census, that's what we do federally, with questions that talk about what is someone's nexus to the city, what are their demographic information, and what is some of the background that they're bringing into what brought them to being unhoused. Are they an unhoused veteran? Do they have substance abuse issues? Things like that. So just a little bit on CityNet, they've been around since 2005. Matt has been with the organization for 9 years. And other cities have been using CityNet census information specifically, because CityNet is also just a general homeless services provider in LA County, Orange County, and Riverside County. But the census part is very important because when Orange County was part of the lawsuit brought by federal judge David Carter, which put all the stipulations there as to how you can enforce your quality of life laws, it was actually CityNet's census that helped develop those numbers that said this is how many shelter beds you need. Whittier followed suit in that, as did Bellflower. So we had a presentation, some of the staff and also some of our city council from Judge Carter and Whittier on this process, which is when the city decided to use some of their Measure H funds to also conduct a homeless census and get a better picture of what our unhoused look like within the city of Doherty. So I'm going to turn this over to Matt to go through those results, and then staff, me, and Brian are available for questions. So I think based off of even just the presentation Brian just did, it's worth getting a little bit of council update on where our programs are going with our COG funding, our next round of COG funding. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you and put up your presentation.
Thank you. Wonderful. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council, city staff. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to engage in this discussion. So you have the full report, which is linked within the agenda, and that's been submitted. What I'm going to do tonight is just pull out some of the highlights of the things that I thought were relevant and interesting to me as we consider the results of the Doherty homeless census. So you could go to the next slide. So about the census, we did this in October. We did it on an early morning and a late evening on 2 different occasions. We mapped the city out ahead of time in partnership with the Department of Public Safety and with the sheriffs that serve the city and city staff to identify the places that we were likely to encounter homeless neighbors. And as Victoria mentioned, the goal here is a survey-based count where ideally we would interview every person that's experiencing homelessness within the city boundaries. So another difference from a point-in-time count, the way that LA County does it, LA County being so large, what they'll do is they'll use an extrapolation methodology, a statistical sampling methodology, which is perfectly legitimate, perfectly valid, perfectly acceptable to HUD. But it doesn't, it tends to not provide as accurate data on a smaller local level, like what you have here in the city of Doherty. It works great for the whole county, which is huge. But our goals here were to interview every single person that was experiencing homelessness within the city. So the next slide. In the, from our perspective, what I want to share, I put this slide up just to show that we've done a number of these censuses recently. We're doing the Orange County point-in-time count tonight. I've got my colleagues down in Central Orange County, and over the next 3 days, like LA County, we're doing it in February. But these are other cities that we've engaged, and I wanted to point out, kind of at the bottom of the list, Glendora, in addition to Doherty, your neighbors in Glendora, and then Azusa, we're under contract to do in this next spring, once we get done with the point-in-time count in Orange County. Also, I am a resident of Azusa, so while we work in the 3 counties that Victoria mentioned, plus Santa Barbara County and San Diego County, as an agency, we do have some work in LA County, but personally, I'm a resident of Azusa. My daughter attends the School of Arts here in Doherty. I dropped her off at a school event before tonight's presentation. So I was somewhat familiar, with the city, and certainly familiar with the dynamics of homelessness in this region, not only because we've done those censuses for Glendora and Doherty now, and also we're going to do for Azusa, but just having lived, we bought a home in Azusa in 1996, 97. So, and right there on the riverbed. So, so I'm familiar with the local dynamics, at least from the Azusa side. So, some of the things that I'm going to pull out from the results of the census are based on my experience of analyzing the data from all of these other cities that we've done. We ask a similar set of questions, and so if something varies from the statistical norm, it kind of stands out to us just because we're so used to looking at the data and we have an expectation of what we're going to find. So the big number is 69, that's the unsheltered count, that's who we identified as living unsheltered in the city. The one that stood out to me is at the bottom where you see 38.3% of those were living from vehicles and RVs. That's a higher number than we typically see. Again, on all those other censuses in those other cities, that tends to be somewhere around 15% to maybe 20%. So it's higher here. Now that could be, as we look at that, well, what does that mean? It could be a regional dynamic. It could also be a reality of time. Just that when we conducted the census in October, we were a year and a half into COVID, and so economic realities of COVID, we know have impacted employment and income. Ironically, the broader data about housing and rents is that it's gone the other way. So there's been a gap that has existed in California for a long time between housing affordability, wages, and what housing costs. But we've seen vacancies go down overall, and housing then therefore go up, or wages stay the same. So it's possible that could also mean that people that were housed previously are now making do from their vehicles. This is we used our phones. We used an Esri app on our phones, which takes advantage of the ArcGIS technology that's resident in cell phones. So we have a dot matrix kind of map here of where all the surveys were taking place. We also have a heat map in the full report. We won't cover that here. But that'll give you a geographic location of where we encountered people that were living homeless, or that were living homeless in the city. In the duration of homelessness, this is one that actually does look very similar to the norm. If you look at that 1 year to 1 to 2 years, it's roughly 50% of the homeless that we encountered have experienced homelessness within the past 2 years. And this is something that is actually very common. You do have 2% at 21 plus years and 12% at 11 to 20 years, and so these are your homeless neighbors that are facing lots of barriers, chronically homeless. And some of the conversation in Brian's report are those kinds of folks that are facing lots of challenges and have lots of barriers to housing. But I point out the 50% within the last 2 years just to say that addressing homelessness is always a moving target, because you could get everybody off the streets today, that all 69. Duarte could come up with a plan for those 69, and in 4 years you're going to be replenished with another 69, according to this statistic, which is again is very common in all the censuses that we've encountered. That there's a churn. There's a larger group of people who are vulnerable to homelessness at the same time that you've got people that are experiencing homelessness. And so that's something that I think is important for planning and consideration. So on the next slide, and you can see I've kind of highlighted with red stars the ones that I think are important. This is actually a good news in terms of health insurance. The number of people that have reported that they have health insurance at 68%. Normally we see that around 40 to 50%. So we look at these things.
Got a question really quick. Did you
Sure.
interview them, or did your group?
Correct.
You did.
So we had 28 to 30 questions. I'm not sure the exact number. They're listed. Actually, it's in the census. The questions that we asked.
Looks like it's 28
questions. Yeah, in appendix 2.
Okay.
We have all the questions that we asked.
Okay.
And so it was voluntary. So if you look at the report, on this one you'll see the N is 47. So that means that 47 people out of the 69 answered this particular question. So some people didn't answer any questions at all, and some people answer some of the questions. In this particular case, 47 people answered that question. And of those 47, 68% had health insurance. And we just point that out because looking at benefits can help to dictate interventions and also to analyze past interventions, the degree to which they're working. So, if health insurance is low, that's a pretty easy intervention from a community standpoint, is that you try to get people enrolled in health insurance. For most homeless neighbors, that's no cost to them, and they're entitled to that benefit. And it saves the community lots of money if they're not using your hospital rooms and your emergency rooms as their primary health care provider. But in this case, that was something that stood out as a positive here in Duarte relative to what we normally see. Community ties. So some of the questions that we asked were about community ties, and this is some of your questions earlier about, how do you link, how are homeless neighbors, particularly homeless neighbors, linked to the city of Duarte? And again, having done this for lots of cities now, and we're now in our second round of working with HUD on point-in-time count for the County of Orange, there is no national standard that would establish community ties, that would say, here's how you link residents without a fixed address to a particular community. If you have a fixed address for a home or business, that's one thing. But if you lack a fixed permanent address, how does a community like Duarte determine which homeless neighbors they're responsible for, and which are responsible for, which the county is responsible for, which other cities are responsible for? And so, lacking that national standard, what we try to do is ask a number of questions. And so we partnered with the city to come up with a number of these questions. One of them was, where do you usually sleep? We asked, where did you go to high school? There's lots of different ways that we can try to get at that question, trying to understand the degree to which the people that we're encountering unsheltered homeless are linked to the city. And so, as you would expect, 81% usually sleep here in Duarte, and then you've got the other cities that they answered listed, which are, for the most part, local cities to local surrounding communities to Duarte. Disabilities. So this is, the reason that I highlight this one is that this is kind of what we normally see when you ask about addiction, you ask about health condition, which is physical health, and then mental health. And I like to point out that these are all self-reported and to a degree self-diagnosed, right? So the question, you can see in the appendix how we ask the question. But obviously we don't independently verify any of these things, and so our experience is just that typically these are underreported. So when we've been able to ask a census and then maybe in conjunction with a city where they've got a shelter and then get most of these residents into a shelter, and then over time do an independent analysis of physical disabilities, mental health concerns, and drug or alcohol addiction, typically what we find is that that they're somewhat underreported. But again, these are all important to understand because these help to qualify individuals for permanent supportive housing through the county's coordinated entry system. So that we ask the question and we report what people tell us, and what they've reported here is pretty standard what we're normally used to seeing. But again, I just wanted to add the caveat that that's typically underreported because it is self-diagnosed, and also just we deploy staff that are experienced and sensitive, but you also have to remember that we're asking very sensitive questions to somebody that's a stranger to them. So we try to ask it in a friendly and compassionate manner. We try to explain why we're doing it, but you can't get around the fact that if you and I were to meet on the street and I would start to ask you within 5 minutes of knowing you about your mental health and your physical disabilities and drug or alcohol addiction, there may be some natural barriers to not want to talk about those things with someone that you just met. Services. So this is interested in services, and we asked two different questions about their interests. One was shelter, which is actually pretty low. Normally we see the shelter number, are you interested in shelter, up around 55, 60%. And so you've got a less of an interest. But I think my analysis of that question in particular is because there's just a lack of local community shelters. And so sometimes we ask a follow-up question like, well, if there was a local shelter, would you be interested? And typically that's a much higher number. So living in Azusa and working with Glendora, I know that there's significant homeless impacts across this region, but I also know that it's difficult in talking with the cities and with the people that are engaged in homeless services or in outreach and engagement, that they're challenged to find local shelter beds. And local is the real key there. So typically people don't want to travel long distances in communities that they don't know, and people that they don't know, to enter shelter. Which is counterintuitive to some. Some might say, well, if I were homeless, I would take any shelter or bed available to me, and maybe you would. But I know we work in Whittier, and some of the county shelter referrals in Whittier are all the way up in Lancaster. Because it's this, because LA County is just so massive, and the way that the services are arrayed, that's one of the community shelters that is an option to them. And it's, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to connect somebody who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Whittier to go to Lancaster. That might as well be, the surface of the moon to them, because it's so foreign and so far away from what their local experience is and what their local knowledge is. So that's that one. And then interest in case management, 70% expressed interest in case management services. So those numbers are quite different, 40% and 70%. That case management number is pretty close to what we normally would expect to see. And with that, I'll conclude. And again, I just want to say, I'll conclude with one thought and then open it to any questions that you may have. So my concluding thought would be, our goal, it is true that CityNet is a homeless services provider. But I was very clear, I tried to make it very clear with the city, and hopefully lived into this, that our expectation on this project is really just to provide a statistical baseline for you all, to help you make informed decisions on whatever strategies or interventions you would have regarding what you're going to do moving forward. So again, as homeless services providers, there's a part of me that's like an advocate for homeless neighbors and would say, I'd love to see services, I'd love to see resources, but I also understand the leadership challenge of balancing community interests, and I have a high value for community safety and public safety, and for public spaces being available for their intended uses, like libraries and parks and trails and public transportation. And so we recognize the impacts that homelessness can have. And so my goal with this project, our goal as an agency, was really just to give you solid statistical footing from which you can make decisions moving forward. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and open up for any questions you may have.
Well, thank you for being here. And questions or comments?
We'll go for
Oh, for
Me too.
We'll start with Ms. Schulz and then Mr. King.
So I'll just go page by page fairly quickly, but so when you say current sleeping situations, you have vehicle RV 38%, street 61%. Did you cross-reference how many of the 38% who are interested in shelters were actually living on the street, or were they living in an RV?
We did not cross-reference that, but we could do that.
Okay, I would be interested in seeing that information.
Let me just make a quick note, because I'm going to walk away from here and I forget that.
Okay.
So just to be clear, it's cross-reference those that are interested in shelter with those that are living from the RVs.
RV or street. I'd like to know if it's the street people saying we want a shelter, or if it's RV people, or if it's mixed or whatever.
Okay.
The next thing is duration of homelessness. So it's been shown in studies that the longer people are homeless, the more that they get addicted to things, have mental health issues, things like that. So when I look at this page, less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, there's really opportunity to maybe have preventative services and to address those things. And then I look at the 66% that say they don't have any kind of addiction. I'd like to have a cross-reference of duration of homelessness with the addiction, the self-reported addiction, and the self-reported mental health data.
I'm making a note. So I think I understand the basis of your question, which I agree with, which is, and if you could even go further upstream with those that are not homeless, and just in general, prevention and diversion from people who are, for people who are vulnerable to homelessness, if you can prevent them and divert them from ever falling into street-level homelessness. I think there's lots of data to suggest that that's the best use of those dollars. Rather, it's like anything else, prevention as opposed to intervention, if you can spend the money on prevention. So we're gonna look at cross-referencing the duration of
The 50%
homelessness
that are within 2 years
with addiction.
with that, with the
Right.
mental health and the drug addiction.
Got it, okay.
And then for staff, and I'll ask you a couple of questions too. So one of the things, well, I'll finish your questions first. So they said that part of what you said was that 38% wanted shelter beds and 70% wanted case management services. So we're going to cross-reference, but was the question actually asked, if there was a local shelter bed, would you be interested? Did the word local come up, or was it just any shelter bed?
Yeah, I'm looking at the appendix. I don't believe we asked that follow-up question. I think we just answered question 27, are you interested in going to a shelter?
But based on your experience, that number is higher for a yes, they want a shelter, if there are local beds available. Is that correct from what you said?
Correct. Both in the, and that from when we've, in other censuses when we've asked that follow-up question, the interest is higher if there's a local option. And then just from experience in doing outreach and engagement as an agency, the consistent feedback from homeless neighbors on the street is that even if there's shelter options, typically it's the one that's closest to where they feel comfortable, where they feel like is their kind of hometown.
Okay.
That's the one they want to go to.
And then for the case management question, did you specifically ask them if they had been offered services by our outreach people?
We did not, we just asked, are you interested in case management services?
Okay, and do you have data that we can give to the actual line item names and such we can give to our outreach coordinator?
We do have that data set, yes.
Okay, have they received that, our outreach people?
I'm not sure, but I can I've been coordinating with the city
Okay.
staff.
Okay, I would like that, please. And then when we go to the recommendations, you say low threshold emergency services. What do you consider low threshold emergency services to be?
So in the field, low threshold would be, you're just trying to eliminate barriers to entry. So ideally, take one threshold would be about like drug use or addiction or mental health status or even physical disability, because there are shelters, and some of them, understandably, there are shelters that can't accommodate, let's just say, physical disability. They may have upper bunks, and there's a certain percentage of people that just can't access them. So ideally, you would have enough beds for people, whether they're facing a physical disability, a mental health disability, a behavioral health, issue, and also community ties. Just that is one that's always a challenge. And we recognize that challenge because every place that we work, and we work across 5 counties, over 40 cities, all the shelter resources typically have some kind of community tie. And so just as somebody who works with this population, sometimes for some people that kind of moment of clarity where they're willing to accept help and get off the streets, like they come around every so often, and we want to be able to connect them to services right at that moment when it occurs. So that's why, from our perspective, looking at the population that you've got some people that have some significant barriers, and so if you can eliminate those barriers, lower the threshold to entry into the system, you can achieve stronger outcomes in the long run.
Well, so when you talk about the recommendation for substance abuse resources and mental health services, 66% said that they didn't have those things, self-reported, of course. So, but now the things you're listing are directly related to those things. So I would be interested in finding out more why a recommendation for something like a triage or recuperative care approach might be helpful. That's one thing. And another thing is specifically if they're saying they don't have it, but they need case management, but they don't want shelter, then I'm unsure how increasing the low threshold emergency services is going to address that. So is there a way for you to kind of go back? Is there someone else that can help with suggestions for additional recommendations that some of this cross-referenced data may show a little bit differently? I don't know, I'm just trying to, because
Well,
this doesn't add up.
One thing that I would, the one thing that I would suggest is that low threshold meaning low threshold to entry. So it's not, my recommendation would not be to not provide those services. It's just what you.
Of course, we
what you
want
wanna
to
do is
provide
get-
them,
Get them in
right.
and provide those services from a sheltered place.
So,
The
but
outcomes
there's
are
no
much better.
shelter recommendation on here, so that was my next question.
Right.
So, with that in mind, I feel like that is a huge recommendation here that is missing. So I'd like to find out more about that and not necessarily here. And then, just the last two things I'll say is that I noticed for staff, the heat map, it shows where a lot of people frequent, so I think we should increase staff presence there for the outreach services in the business center and near Walmart. And then also, there's a high nexus with Monrovia and Azusa. So I feel like we need to have more partnerships and discussions with both of those cities on this report and go from there. But increasing the outreach coordinator to the business centers and to Walmart area and other places where the locations have been identified, in addition to giving those names to staff, I think will be very useful. So you'll be able to get cross-reference this data that I was asking
Correct.
about then?
Yep.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you.
Mr. Kane?
Thank you. Councilwoman Schultz, you're right on the money, and I really do appreciate your questions. Yeah, I think a lot of the issues are happening at those hot spot areas and so on, and I brought it up a few times in regards to, can we add a few more CSOs? This is, I think the staff can certainly work on that. I've seen it at South Pasadena, I've seen it at other cities. They have maybe perhaps more on foot or on bike kind of patrols to deter some of these people to go ahead and congregate. That would be perhaps, but of course, I'm just suggesting, right? I'm seeking for a staff work and see what we can go in and do together to hopefully remediate some of this. As for your census report, this is really comprehensive and it's easy to read. I really do appreciate this. I really do. And I think you said that you were working with City of Azusa, or you're currently working with City of Azusa too, right?
So we are, we're setting dates with them. So we in terms of when we'll do their census, I think it's in April. So we're under contract, and our agreement with them is that they would allow us to get through the Orange County point-in-time count, which, like LA, was delayed a month, and so that kind of threw our schedule back. But yeah, we're excited about that because, for many reasons, but one of them is when we do that census, then we'll also be able to cross-reference the Glendora, Azusa, Duarte data sets and create more of a regional kind of map to share with all three cities, and also be able to determine the degree of mobility and migration among those cities. Because if we encounter people in Azusa that we previously encountered in October in Duarte, we'll be able to identify that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think this has to do with whoever, whoever the city wants to go ahead and bid on to, and I don't think there's a standard on this, right? I mean, if they use another person, it could be, or another entity, it could be totally different from this. This is such a great baseline, because I would be so curious to cross-reference with Azusa, and unfortunately, you don't do Monrovia, right? As you can see right here, it really shows that 23% is from Duarte, and then the rest of them are like from other places, especially, I think the second highest one is really, if you go other LA cities and then inside LA cities and so on, that's majority. And how did it get here, right? They don't somehow just teleport it over here. There is that, transportation goal line. And how do we, I mean, if we find out all these stuff, how do we go ahead and solve, starting to finding ways to go ahead and remediate some of that stuff. And then if you look at Monrovia, that's right after 12.8%, that's 6 people around, I'm guessing around there, maybe 6 people and a lake, right? So I'm so curious to see if there's a correlation. Are there a lot of people in Duarte is moving over to Monrovia? I don't think so, because and I've said it before, I've seen with my own eyes what they have done to go in and push people over, and Azusa too. So it's so interesting to go ahead and see this, and I want to go ahead and see if there's a baseline from Azusa and see, hey, if there is more Azusa, there's less Duarteans, going into Azusa, then are they all pushing over towards this? Why is this happening, right? We got to go find out the root causes and then how we can go ahead and get more Measure H money, because this is happening, whatever and so on. But this is really good findings, I find out. This is good.
The other thing I just mentioned, because you spurred something. So of the 28 questions that we asked, about 22, 23 of them are, will also be consistent with the point in time count questions when they do surveys. Even in LA County, even though they use statistical sampling, they do interview a certain percentage. And so we try to keep those 22, 23 questions very similar, so just for the reasons you're talking about, so that we can compare across regions. And so this data set, whatever you get from HUD, or from LASA, whenever your point in time count data comes to you, you should be able to compare with this data set pretty closely most of the questions, because we ask them in the same way that HUD requires, and we ask them in the same way in Glendora, and we'll recommend to Azusa. I mean, it's partly up to the cities to decide, but we'll recommend to Azusa that we keep those 22, 23 demographic questions, disability questions, income questions, what else? Disability questions, all similar, so that you can compare your results across the region.
I'm just curious if you guys do this, but this has to do with asking questions, is, when you ask straightforward questions and knowing the fact that if I'm guilty, I'm going to say no, right? So I think that's what Councilwoman Schultz was saying, is have we ever think about like a third-party questions? What do you think about drugs? What do you think about your friends is doing drugs? And then indirectly, we're able to go ahead and give more accurate information. I'm just curious if we can, I don't know, that's just, that's what you guys want to do. But I think, look at that, the heat map, and I mean, I see it all the time, every day. I'm looking at Buena Vista and Huntington. I go to J and A and eat there. I mean, every morning, and Judy was over there would tell me all these whatever stuff that's going on. We got to do something, because they keep coming, and we just got to find ways to help these people. But I appreciate this. This is really good.
I just have one last question, sorry. So when you do Azusa then, when you do the census there, are you going to include the riverbed?
The parts that are Azusa, my understanding is yes, but because they asked us, they said, will you go with us to the riverbed? We said, absolutely. We want to go everywhere. We want to capture as much data as we can. Again, our goal with this is to be as comprehensive and thorough as we can. it's to be determined to what exactly that means, just because I know that there's parts of the riverbed are not Azusa jurisdiction. So typically, when we do these censuses, the local municipality, whether it's a city or county, only wants to go to the areas that are within their span of control. And so if there's areas in there that are county property or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or other cities that maybe down, maybe parts of Irwindale, farther downstream, my understanding is that, my expectation is what that will mean is that we'll just go to Azusa, but we will, as a data collection agency, we'll hope to collect as much of that as we can. And because we're using the GIS coordinates, we'll be able to map that pretty specifically where exactly we went on the riverbed.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for this report.
Are there any other comments or questions for Matt? All right, thank you so much for coming this evening. Oh, Mr. Trump?
Sorry. Compared to those questions, this is probably a silly question. The follow-up question to where do you sleep? 80% of them says Duarte. Do you guys happen to ask them why?
We did not ask why in this census. So let me just double check.
Is it something about our streets?
Well, let me answer it this way. So we didn't capture that data within this data set. I can tell you though, again, from a service provider standpoint who engages lots of homeless neighbors as an agency across 5 counties, the answer is typically people, that's where they feel comfortable. And what that means is it's either there's connections to people that they know, they feel safe there. So in the Glendora, for example, did ask that question. We did ask why. And the number one reason was they felt safe in that community. And I think that's probably the number one reason anywhere you would go is why are you homeless here? It's because the iteration of the answer would be some degree of I feel safe here. I know how to get my needs met and I feel safe and connected here in a way that I don't in other places. And just anecdotally, we work in a lot of coastal cities. And so if you're a coastal city in California, they all believe that every homeless person in their cities comes from somewhere else because if you're homeless and you're not fixed, why wouldn't you go down to the beach and sit under the pier and dip your toes in the sand? And the reality is that they do have homeless across the coast. If you go to the beach, you'll see homeless people. And almost anywhere that you go, coastal cities are impacted. But the reality is that even though public transportation, you could take it from here easily and get to the coast, people don't do that. And the reason that they don't, and the reason that they stay where they're at, is it's some version of that's where they feel safe and that's where they feel like they can get their needs met.
Thank you.
Okay, I will, Dr.
Only one very quick thing, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Over time. I want to echo what some of the council members says. I want to thank Matt. I want to thank the council for authorizing staff to engage them to do this study. Just like you promised, we really do now have an information base on which, we're starting to get towards good policy because you heard all of the questions here. We're actually able to ask informed questions that prior to getting your report, we could not ask. So I think it's just so valuable. Staff will obviously follow up on the matters that you talked about, and we'll follow up with you about what Councilman Schultz and some of the others had questions. But again, I just want to thank you. You've done a real service to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to item 5, which is announcements of upcoming community events. I do have a speaker card from Joanna G.
Good evening, City Council. Joanna G. from Duarte Library. We are starting our in-house programming next month of March. Our first program is Smarty Pants Storytime. It's going to start Friday, March 4th, and continue on to the end of March at 11 a.m. Registration is required. We also have for kids personalized pencil boxes, and that's going to be Wednesday, March 30th at 4 p.m. and it's for children ages 5 to 12. And for the teens, we have a program called Fun with Ozobots, and that'll be Wednesday, March 23rd at 3:30 p.m. We are also going to be closed on March 10th for Staff Development Day, but will reopen on Friday, March 11th. Thank you. Any questions? That's it.
As always, great job, thank you. Any other announcements on upcoming events? Some not so fun.
Yeah, I have an announcement. Actually, Amanda, you need to come up here for this announcement. I'm told that you guys might have questions.
I have a main question.
I have an announcement of a community event, which is Amanda's going to be leaving us soon. And I wanted to have her come this evening because I'm pretty sure some people might want to say something about Amanda. But Amanda's been here since 2017, so it's about 5 years. And I don't mean this in a bad way. It seems like it's been longer than that, but it's not because it was terrible. It's really because she's just done so much while she's been here. She's been a real asset to the community. Amanda's going to be leaving. She's going to the city of Norco. She's going to be the director of facilities and maintenance. So that's a nice advancement for her. But her time here has been very productive. She's been a great coworker. She got so much stuff done. We have a little gift for her later in the week that will tie into some of the work that she's done here. One of the things that she did that was just noticeable to everybody is the work she did on the street name signs. But just to point that out is just really a minimum to what she's really done overall. She's done a lot. She's been really valuable, and the growth that she's experienced while she's been here has been fantastic too. So I just want to say thank you to her, and maybe others want to say something too.
Feel free to speak and not go last.
Or maybe Amanda wants to say something, I don't know.
Amanda's going to be emotional. I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity to work for you. I've had a great 5 years here working for Craig, for management, and I got some really awesome coworkers. I'm going to miss this place. I'm very excited to work in my own community, to serve the parks and facilities there that my daughter plays in. My commute is going down from an hour and a half to almost 8 minutes from my house to City Hall. I'm very happy. I thank you guys for this opportunity. I really, really enjoyed my time here.
With Mr. Trong first.
Amanda, unfortunately, I only got to speak to you a couple of times, and I'm only going on my second year, but to see the transformation of the signs, because I've been here for 35 years, I've seen how the signs look. When Craig said that, I was like, you did a really good job on that project, and our loss is your own community's gain. So congratulations on the short commute and being able to spend more time with your family. You're going to be truly missed here, and keep up great work that you do for all the communities. Thank you very much.
Mr. Charles?
Amanda, it's been such a pleasure to work with you. All of the things that you've done with all the sidewalk repairs, with just the slow parking things that we did, all the work with City of Hope, you're just going to be very hard to replace. We'll miss you. I've seen directly and talked to you about all the work that you're doing and just value you a lot. So I'll miss you, and I'll send you some cookies hopefully. And I'm so happy for you that you're close in your community and able to make an impact for your own family too. So thank you for everything. It's been a pleasure, and please keep in touch.
Mr. Kang?
I can't believe it's been 5 years.
I know.
I still remember vividly, you were here and you came from Alhambra.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about all the wayfinding signs in Alhambra and what you guys did.
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate you for making these signs really, really well. Remember when I was telling you was like,
Yeah.
all tilted, right?
Yeah.
I don't see that anymore, so I really
No, we got to get a special company out here. But now we know how to do it, so yeah.
Yeah, I really do appreciate your enthusiasms and what you have done for the city and all. I mean, our city is looking so much better because of our staff and especially you too. And we're going to be missing you. And you're gonna be having a great time. Might as well just, don't do, 8 minutes, go work from home. And you don't have to dress up. But yeah, we'll definitely miss you. Thank you so much for what you have done for our city. Thank you, Amanda.
Mr. Garcia?
Amanda, really quick, haven't had the opportunity to really get to know you, but I'm sincerely happy for what you mentioned and for you and for your family. You'll be closer to home. And just congratulations. We are going to miss you. The city's going to miss you, but wherever you go, you're going to shine and you're going to do great things. So congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Hi, and I'm not as happy as council that you're leaving. I remember, I just want to thank you so much for, I know you got tired of me calling you about my signs. I know you got tired of me calling you about the sidewalk, but, but you did an awesome job. Every time I called you, you were very diligent. You had an answer for me. And I really, really appreciate that. And I'm definitely gonna miss you. Our city's gonna miss you, and good luck with your adventures. But like I said, I know you're happy. Your husband still works in LA City.
Yeah.
So he can be, y'all can ride together back to the water. Ain't too late.
He's in San Pedro now, so.
I tried. Well, congratulations on your new adventure. I know you'll do well, and we'll leave a chair for you just in case you change your mind.
Thank you, Tony.
Ms. Hamilton, I will say that your work speaks for itself, but I still remember the first time I met you at City Hall. So is your daughter now 8?
She's
It's
gonna be 6. Yeah, in a month she'll be 6.
She'll be 6, so were you here when she was only gonna turn 2?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. She was tall. Look, I mean,
Yeah, she's taller.
Yeah.
She's taller. Yeah.
And I remember that you had mentioned that your husband was a firefighter and that your daughter would always receive fire trucks. And so I hope you save Red.
We still have your fire truck, yes, we do.
But, again, like I said, your work speaks for itself. You are always a pleasant person to be around. And seeing you out in the community, even with that Royal Oaks Drive light craziness at Royal Oaks School, we could mention a whole long laundry list of things. I'm not gonna miss you because I expect you to visit your friends here in Horty, and I'll ask them to text me and say, hey, Amanda's coming by, and I'll swing by. Although, you could probably squeeze in, that hour-and-a-half drive between all your 8-minute drives when you possibly have a day off. But thank you so much for serving this community, and really with a lot of heart and gusto. You had a lot of grit, and you were ready to go when you first came. I was like happy for you from not having to drive all the way to Alhambra, and knowing that you were coming from Norco, and for 5 years, you want to spend time with I would say mostly your daughter, because your guy is, working also, but seeing her, grow up is gonna be one of your best ever experiences. So again, I congratulate you. I know this council is very thankful for you being here and appreciate you. So all the best.
Thank you, Zion. Thank you, City Council.
Is this announcement still? Okay, perfect.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. We have, it's bittersweet to see Amanda go, but we definitely wish her all the best. While we are saying goodbye to Amanda, or not goodbye, but see you later. She's still here, right? I told her she has to stay through the entire meeting tonight. I wanted to take a moment to introduce our new recreation supervisor over at the fitness center. So I'll welcome to the mic very shortly after I do a brief bio, but Alberto Castaneda Salazar is joining us from the city of El Monte. And he comes to us with just about 16 years of experience in aquatics. He has some certification also as a level 1 CrossFit trainer. So a perfect match for what we're looking for in this next chapter over at the fitness center. He started actually last week, and last meeting that, or last time we convened, I said I would bring him over and make sure I showed you his face and introduced him. So I know he got to meet Mayor Finley last week, and so I thought I'd bring him over here. He's definitely hit the ground running. He comes to us, again, with a lot of experience working his way up from recreation leader to an actual lifeguard instructor to pool manager to aquatics coordinator, and now as a supervisor here in our lovely city. And you know, he also has some experience working in the academic realm of working with students with special needs or disabilities, specifically in the Alhambra Unified School District and also our neighboring school district, Monrovia. So at this time, I'll turn it over to him, and he has a couple of brief remarks for you.
Sweet. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Just like Mr. Enriquez mentioned, I'm excited to be part of the Duarte community, and not just the community, but in general, the team, the department, and everybody in the leadership here. Like he said, I've come from the city of El Monte, been there for 16 years, been there my entire life with my family since back in '89. My family has been in the El Monte area since 1942, so there's definitely a lot of pride, not just from El Monte, but from the entire San Gabriel Valley. I look forward to being able to do great things here in the foothills, especially here in the city of Duarte. And I'm excited. It's my 6th day, and standing in front of you to get this opportunity to be here on the mic and just say hello, get to see everybody. That's really exciting because not a lot of cities get the opportunity for all their employees to be able to do that. And not just that, but seeing the support that you have for your employees that are also moving on to greater things in their life, and to have something really nice to say about them, that also speaks a lot to me. And without a doubt, I can totally see how Amanda commuted for an hour and a half every day here for 5 years, right? To be able to do that and work for a city that has the type of leadership that they have in the government body and their directors as well. So again, I'm really excited to be in here. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions or there's anything that you guys want to ask me. I'm totally open for that.
Double check if anyone.
So you worked at El Monte for 16 years?
I did.
So you worked with Andre and Jessica, right?
Oh, Jessica, Ancona,
Yeah.
Andre Quintero, yes, all of them were part of, Mr. Quintero was mayor there
Right.
up until about a year ago. Ancona is now the mayor for the city. So yes, I mean, they are people who I've worked with, you know, and who part of our department have had events and community outreach and so forth. Yes,
Awesome. I want to see Jessica tomorrow, so yeah, great.
of course. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Anyone else?
I would just like to say welcome, and I'm looking forward to doing CrossFit.
Oh, awesome. So yeah,
Thank you for choosing us.
No, thank you guys for giving me the opportunity. There's definitely a lot of exciting things that I'm looking into proposing onto our department to bring on board onto the fitness center, into the aquatic realm, bringing back lessons, and just in general, aquatic programming and aquatic awareness to our community. I feel that that's going to be really exciting.
I'm curious,
Mhm.
can we bring in water polo?
So
Come on.
water polo, swim team, and definitely our a fundamentals of diving is in the talks with Manuel. So again, some of the things that I loved about, you know, just in general, the hiring process and the onboarding has been the leadership, the growth, and then the innovation to the department and the leadership behind it. I feel that it's very embracive of the ideas that I have coming forward, and I'm excited to be able to bring all those up front and seeing which ones we're able to execute.
I like you already. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else before I speak? So when I first heard, someone here, oh, sorry, no, see, no, see, no, oh, see.
Alberto, I just want to say, bienvenido to Duarte, welcome.
Gracias.
I'm excited that you're excited, and we're happy to have you. I hope for a long time.
Appreciate it.
Well, I'm going to say, can you say my name?
Miss Perez Karachi?
Was that my first name's not on there, right? No. When I first heard that you're coming to the city,
Yes.
I won't say who I called, but they're in your department, and she's awesome, by the way. But we called you Alfonso, Adolfo, and then we got to Alberto.
Yes.
So your name is now ingrained in my brain, but you picked a wonderful city to move on to. The way that Mr. Enriquez mentioned your long resume is really exciting, and as you can see, some of my colleagues are looking forward to various programs. I will tell you now that I haven't stepped foot in the fitness center for several years, because I'll be honest, I don't like to work out. But they can work out extra for me. And if you realize with Amanda Hamilton, you know, Duarte, I'm gonna just say, congratulations, Duarte. We are able to invite people, engage people, encourage them to come work for us, apply, and then when they find out, because you could have easily said no thank you after you had a couple of interviews, but you did choose Duarte. They chose you, but you chose Duarte. So I'm thankful, like I said, for Ms. Hamilton for choosing to come to Duarte. And we're very proud of our employees that do move on, you know, whether it's to spend time with family and or a promotion, which quite a few of our employees move on to bigger and better things. But like I said at one of our awards ceremony, they always come back to say hello. And that will show you how much our city family will care for our employees. So thank you so much again for choosing Duarte. And I look forward, I will step in there just to see if you're working. But don't make me lift a weight or anything. But I look forward to the listings of some of the new programs.
Of course. No, and thank you very much again.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you.
I got a question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just want to welcome you to the city of Duarte. I worked for El Monte. I was a reserve firefighter for the city of El Monte, so I kind of know a little bit about El Monte. It's a pretty good city. And just want to welcome you to the city of Duarte. And what do you know about stop signs? You know, since Amanda's leaving, I might have to, you know.
Stop signs, shape the color and the law behind it, we gotta stop.
Thank you. Welcome to the city.
When did you work there? El Monte Fire? You mean county?
Okay, we're gonna keep going on with the council meeting. So thank you again, Alberto. Any more announcements?
It's hard to follow this up, so I'm going to keep it brief. We have our next redistricting public hearing as added at the request of council on Monday, February 28th at 7 p.m. here in the community center. And then the one after that is March 8th at 7:15 adjacent to the city council meeting. We also have upcoming our Duarte 3-on-3 basketball tournament on March 12th starting at 8 a.m. It is $50 per team, and the flyer says 9 a.m. Our city news says 8 a.m. I guess I need to check that. We'll fix that. It's $50 per team, and you can get more information by calling the Duarte Teen Center, 626-303-0863. We also anticipate having the city news up on the website by Monday, and that's important because Parks and Rec spring registration starts on March 14th, and that'll be online at our website, accessduarte.com. And Brian already announced about our Starbucks with the Sheriffs. So do you have any questions for me?
Any questions? Mr. Lewis?
The 3-on-3 tournament, what's the age limit? Is there
That's
an
a
age?
good question. Do you happen to know the age limit?
I mean, at this point, we're not advertising an age limit, but
It's
As
generally
long as you're-
teens,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
I think.
I think if you can still dunk, you can play.
You can dribble, you can keep up, you can play.
I can't touch the net no more, so I'm out.
So I guess that when you find out the details, you can email the council with the information.
We will do that. Also be on your council calendar. But we want to make sure we get the word out there since signups are happening. Anything
Sounds
else?
good.
All right.
Thank you.
Is ESPN3 gonna televise this?
Sure.
So I'm going to move on to item 6, which is oral communications. Anyone wishing to speak may do so at this time. These are items that are not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 7, which is the consent calendar. Are there any items that need to be pulled? Or go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem, can I pull G really quick? Just,
G?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, do I have a motion for the consent without G?
Motion?
Approved. Second?
So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Opposition? So moved. So we have the item G that was pulled. Mr. Kang?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I read the staff report. I'm just curious, how did that happen? And in addition to that, my second question is, I really love the landscaping and all that stuff. And some of the lights that I see at night, I mean, it's fabulous, right? I'm just curious, on the other side of it, these light poles, they kind of stopped. I'm just,
So, yeah, the light poles on the east side of Cinco Robles, we're still waiting for those to come in. They'll be in around June, July. They're experiencing delays because of COVID to get those poles. So once we get those in June or July, we will have light poles on the east side of Cinco Robles. And so when the City of Hope started building, that property, the street and the portion of the sidewalk was never dedicated to the city. It was found when we were doing Lot F and G that we needed to have that section dedicated to the city. And it was just a cleanup effort. We did something similar for New Hope Village, and that was done about a year ago, I believe. That was about a year ago where we cleaned up that section too, so.
and to dedicate it, meaning that we get the jurisdictions to clean up and.
Yeah, and to maintain that section of roadway.
I see. Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay.
Any other questions on this item? Do I have a motion to?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So we have, thanks. We have a motion and a second on item G. Any further discussion? Opposition? So moved. All right, we're going to move on to item 9, which is public hearing. Should I read it? It's item 9A, the Municipal Code Amendment 2022-01 to establish and amend definitions and regulations for urban lots. I gotta put my glasses on. Urban lot, look at that, I added an S. Urban lot splits and duplex developments in single-family residential zones to implement recently enacted Senate Bill 9 and introduction of ordinance number 907. Staff report?
Well, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Long
Hello,
time,
Mr.
I'm
Hall.
glad to be back, glad to see all your faces again. And I'm gonna try and make this as lively as possible. You know, this is planning stuff, this is land use stuff, sometimes it can be a little dry, but I'll try and make it quick, and we'll have questions at the end, and please feel free to ask as much as you'd like. On September 16th of last year, the governor signed into law Senate Bill number 9, SB 9 we'll be calling it this evening. This requires cities to ministerially approve 3 things: 2 dwelling units per parcel in a single-family residential zone, where previously only 1 unit would have been permitted. Second is urban lot splits in single-family residential zones and the allowance for 2 units to be built on each resulting parcel or both. SB 9 took effect January 1st of this year. SB 9 does allow jurisdictions to adopt local ordinances to establish regulations that don't conflict with the bill, and that's why we're here tonight. If adopted, these regulations will allow the city to exercise as much local control as allowed by state law, while allowing at the same time for us to consider perhaps an illustrative design standards document that we'll talk a little bit more at the end of my presentation. Again, Municipal Code Amendment 2022-01 proposes to modify our residential zone chapter, off-street parking regulations chapter, site plan and design review and definitions, and does add a new chapter into our development code related to urban lot splits. On January 18th of this year, Planning Commission recommended unanimously approval to the council of this code amendment. So pursuant to SB 9, local agencies may impose objective zoning, subdivision, and design review. These things include height limits, setbacks, certain setbacks. Agencies can require owner occupancy of a site that has been subdivided. Short-term rentals are prohibited through lots that are created through SB 9. In terms of parking, local agencies have a few tools at their disposal. They can require a maximum of 1 parking space per unit. Unless these units are within a half mile of a quality transit stop. This is basically going to be properties near the Gold Line within a half a mile of the Gold Line station. Staff has also included a provision requiring new units be built within a garage for any required parking. The city has also included a requirement that existing garages need to be maintained unless it precludes development with a minimum unit size under the law. And finally, that the use of garages is incentivized through the allowance of a 2-story duplex on top of a minimum 2-car garage, which would be our minimum under current code parking requirement. So the 2 separate sections here tonight are duplex developments and urban lot splits. They kind of weave together a bit, but I'm going to take them individually so you can kind of see what each piece does. Under the duplex developments, again, these are only single-family residential zones. These are not multifamily zones or any other zones besides that. This new section would create the process, objective development standards, and other requirements for these 2-unit or also duplex developments. Here's a few highlights. A requirement would be to limit the new size, the units, new units to a size of 800 square feet, not including any provided garage space. So that would not be counted. A 1-story height limitation for most projects, and again, unless they're going to be constructing a minimum of a 2-car garage. We do get setbacks and lot coverage and a few other single-family zoning standards. However, there's a 4-foot setback limitation imposed by state law for side and rear yards. Landscaping will continue to be something that's required, as well as required objective design standards in terms of the house design to meet our current chapter or code chapter that we have inside the municipal code. The other section is urban lot splits. This will create a new section. It'll be in the subdivision section of our code. And these are really crafted to retain and to the extent allowed the amount of open space, trying to get character and quality of a single family neighborhood to the degree possible. A couple of highlights here from this particular new chapter to our code is that there was neither resulting parcels shall be smaller than 40% of the lot area of the original parcel proposed with a minimum of 1,200 square feet. So I'm going to use Brian's math from earlier today. We had a lot of 10,000 square feet. They could divide it into a 6,000 and a 4,000 square foot lot. They couldn't be any less than 40%, so you couldn't make it 3,900 square foot of lot. It had to be minimum 4,000. No more than 2 units are permitted on any parcel created by an urban lot split. Cities can prohibit, and we have, the creation of ADUs and JDUs in conjunctions with projects seeking to incorporate both an urban lot split and a duplex development. There will be a requirement for owner occupancy affidavit for lot split applications. Lots that are divided under SB 9 cannot be divided again by the same applicant. We have some restrictions on flag lots, but at the same time, staff had to create flag lots that are included inside the proposed ordinance, basically to comply with these laws. A flag lot basically is, if you think about it, kind of has a front piece and a back piece. The front piece is a larger, usually more of a squarish shape, and then the rear portion of the flag lot has the pole portion of it, which is really the access piece, which is a driveway, and then at the back, the lot expands in size, and that's where the units would be built. We've created those standards. We've ensured that they meet fire access and minimum lot frontage accessible to the street, and that we also had block wall and landscaping requirements to make sure that they're at least green for the most part, within the pole portion of the flag lot. A couple of other small changes that will need to occur because of this relate to the modification of definitions, references, changes to other things within the code, just to make sure it's internally consistent. One of the larger things, however, is that our code currently requires many single-family projects to receive special approval, either through the Architecture Review Board or Planning Commission through a hearing process. Furthermore, the Doherty Development Code now requires notification to abutting property owners. SB 9 now mandates that ministerial project approval is required with no hearing process involved. So staff is suggesting this change to create a consistent and equitable site plan and design review process for single-family home applications that eliminate hearings and notifications that would otherwise be prohibited under this new law. One of the last pieces of this SB 9 law is that even though we have design standards within our code, they're not truly illustrative standards, they're more written standards. We feel safe that these will allow designs within our community based upon projects like this that'll actually meet kind of our standard for what we consider to be good design in single-family zones. However, I think staff thinks that an illustrative design standard guidebook would be helpful for applicants and staff in the future. If this is something that we're interested in, we'll bring this back to the City Council at a future budget cycle and ask for additional funding at that time to look into creating something that's a little easier to read and understand. So the recommendation of the Planning Commission and staff is to introduce ordinance number 907, establishing definitions and regulations for urban lot splits and duplex developments in single-family residential zones to implement recently enacted state law. Hopefully I made that as palatable as possible, and I'm here to answer any questions that council has.
Let's see. Oh, it's because your light's on. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Ms. Scholes?
I just have a couple of questions. Hi, sorry, am I not on?
Thanks.
I'm not on, sorry. What's the definition of short-term rental? What is
Anything
short?
30 days or under.
30 days or less. And then, can you, if someone puts in an application, can you determine or give them permission for a certain part of their parcel to be used? Or does it, do we have to approve the exact location on their property for it? I mean, part of the question is, if it's gonna obstruct something for a neighbor, can we ask them to put it on a different part of their property that maybe is more, I don't know, happy for everyone?
I believe the state law is increasingly becoming one that NIMBYism plays, and I don't want to even say NIMBYism because that's a strong term, that neighborhood impact, our input is less important to states' decisions at this point compared to their desire to build housing units. So could the city influence an applicant to try and have them maybe place something in a certain area of their property? Potentially, but it wouldn't stand a legal test. So the idea I think staff has is that through the inclusion of smaller unit sizes and with the allowance for required parking and landscape setbacks and other things, that the development envelope for most properties will be somewhat restricted. However, we can't prohibit someone from putting, for instance, in this new law, anything closer than 4 feet to side or rear property lines. That's pretty close. And so in today's code, you have larger setbacks and things are going to be pushed towards more of the center of the property. This is going to have some implications where people who feel like they'd like to move things closer to the side and rear property lines will have the ability to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Garcia?
Jason, good evening, how are you? Good. One of my worries, of my many worries with SB 9 was parking because our city's really small streets. Sorry about that. Can you give me one more time what we're doing about parking? I heard there's a maximum one space per unit, or?
So these laws are written by folks up in Sacramento. They involve a series of professionals, planners, and other folks that help to design these laws, and attorneys as well. So they don't capture everything, and they give cities some ability to be creative and flexible about certain things unless they're otherwise prohibited. And in certain sections of this parking, we are taking some liberties because they aren't addressed as prohibitions within state law. So those items related to parking are this, is that any new unit that is not within a half mile of a major transit stop or a major transit corridor We do not have a major transit corridor, we only have a major transit stop, and that's the Gold Line. Is limited to providing only one parking space per unit. The city has option to include a provision requiring that the new units be built within a garage rather than outside, just on a driveway. The city has also put a requirement that existing garages need to be maintained unless it precludes development of a minimum unit size, which that's the 800 square feet plus the minimum setbacks. A series of things would have to be analyzed to see that. And finally, that the use of garages is incentivized by allowing a second story. So otherwise, there's going to be limits on these to be just one-story buildings. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? I think that was a thorough, actually, I had questions, but they got answered by their questions, so it was good. And I do trust that staff will keep an eye out and make sure that the units that may be built in the future will be well for our city. You know, with obviously the prohibition that you guys have, hopefully it'll still work out. Mr. King.
Just one question. This is a lot of reading. I'm just curious, is there any way that we can make it into more easier to inform folks if they want to, subdivide or whatever and so on, like the setbacks and do some more graphical things that if people want to do it, they don't have to read this whole entire thing. It's like, okay, well, the side setbacks is this much, and this is the maximum, and if this is happening, you need to go and get a garage, something like that.
That's a great segue. And yes, the simple answer is yes. When we approved ADUs and the council adopted the ordinance for accessory dwelling units, we created a pamphlet and it's available online. A lot of folks will come by and pick it up. It's really easy to read. I don't think there's any way to dismiss the actual code language because you still have to have that for purposes of development and for legal purposes. But yes, we will certainly implement the easier to read and digestible format, even if we don't do an illustrative design standards book. It's just easier, and most people don't understand all the gobbledygook that we have in here understood. I think the big part to understand is there's, in our opinion, and this ordinance was crafted with the help of with Ty and Rattan and Tucker, and Craig and I spent many months thinking about how this rolls out. The state has not put out a set of handbooks or guidelines to assist cities. They seem to do that a year or so after they require cities to implement laws, which doesn't make much sense to practitioners, but we don't think that SB 9 is going to have a tremendous impact on the community. There's some reasons for that. One is that really people looking to intensify their properties have a choice between ADUs and SB 9 projects. And sometimes you can kind of merge them, but how we've written it, you can't get the full Monty out of a SB 9 project because we limit the ability to create ADUs, where people are going to look at that and say, well, maybe it's just easier to build ADUs. And there's some advantages and disadvantages to both options, but for this, it really requires people that are going to say, hey, there's an economic market for me to demolish a house and then split it into two and build 4 units on it, right? I don't think the market's there yet. It could be one day, but right now we're not sitting on a lot of underutilized properties that really have kind of the makeup to be a successful SB 9 project. We only can think of a handful. So we're going to see just continued growth pressures and ADUs, and SB 9 will be a way to help put more units on the street. But I think SB 9 is going to be a less chosen tool.
Yeah, it just economically it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Golding? Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to business items, which is going to be 10A.
Mayor Pro Tem, we need to open the public hearing.
Oh, I apologize. So the public hearing is now open?
Yep.
Were there any written correspondence?
We did not receive any written correspondence, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. Is there anyone here that would like to speak? I will close public hearing. And we are introducing this, or,
Yes, so now we need a motion
okay,
pursuant to staff's recommendation.
all right. So I need a motion and a second.
And that would be a motion to introduce ordinance number 907, establishing definitions and regulations for urban lot splits and duplex developments in single-family residential zones to implement recently enacted state law.
So move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Opposition? So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk money. We're going to have the business item of fiscal year 2021-22 mid-year budget report and approval of corresponding budget amendments. Ms. Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. We're going to pull up the mid-year budget presentation and kick it off for you. Happy to report that this year we have some good news, and so big smile on my face. There's been many years where we've had some difficult choices, and it's a difficult report to present to you. But this year, the numbers are looking very positive, and so let's go to the next slide, and I'll just start kicking it off. Back in June, when we first adopted our budget, we had a surplus at that time of just under $500,000 that we were projecting, $446,200 surplus to be exact. Our mid-year report right now is indicating something much more positive, $3,396,300 in surplus. That's a big change. So what has changed? Well, obviously, when we talk about change, you talk about a world before COVID and a world during COVID, and here we are. Trying to make predictions during that time was really difficult. And so obviously, we tried to remain very conservative about how quickly our construction was going to happen or how sales tax revenue was going to be impacted by this kind of new thing that we hadn't experienced. Well, I'm happy to report that we have had improved sales tax revenue over what we projected, increased building and plan check activity at City of Hope, and the phase 2 of the MBK project is moving forward faster than we had expected. So the net change in expenses on the other side of things is largely the same, and we'll talk about the kind of positives and negatives in that category. Next slide, please. When we adopted our budget, we were expecting our general fund revenues to come in around $20 million. Our estimated actual now is $23.5. And so right around $3.2 million increasing just in the revenue category. So overall, general fund revenues are projected to be this 3.2. Well, sales tax revenue is a big part of that. And sales tax revenue, even last year, was very positive. It continues to perform very well. $6.6 million in our original sales tax, $3.9 million in our new sales tax revenue that is being generated by our sales tax override, which is $1 million more than what we had budgeted. That is substantial. It really is an indicator of the economy. People are spending money. The fact that online is a huge part of it, it's all really a very positive indicator of what's going on. Construction-related revenues continue to exceed our projections, and this year by more than $1.7 million more than the budget. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means as far as an indicator. Yes?
Can I have I just want to ask a quick question. When you say online, is it because now the online sales tax is trickling down from the zip code? Is that how?
No, so online has been a part, basically we get a share
Right.
of the online that is coming into our state. And really it goes by region, and then it also goes by how well we're improving every quarter that we get sales tax. So we've always gotten a share of that. What we're finding is that people are buying more online. And so those indicators, we probably have not had, as I say we, Hinterleiter and Delamas is really the one that does all of the sales tax analysis, and they're the ones kind of doing projections. As far as indicating that brick and mortar buildings, shall we say, were not going to be as popular as online, that's always been a prediction, a trend. But as far as how much that was going to be, all of the projections have underestimated how much online revenues, sales tax revenues have been going to come in. So for us, we were being conservative in what share we were going to get from that. And it has really shot through the roof as far as for all agencies, but also for us, given how much our other sales tax is growing and therefore our share of that online. The other part of that as well is that we are seeing that a lot of the businesses that are, for others, maybe not doing as well because the online is doing well, our businesses continue to do well. So not only are we getting our share of the online, but we also have businesses in town that continue to be strong in this economy.
Like
And
Walmart, CarMax.
exactly, auto sales, for example, there was a lot of prediction that we were gonna hit, a flat line, that we really had kind of hit a max. And especially when COVID was happening, thinking that that was going to have some negative impacts to what that looked like. Instead, we didn't even hit the ceiling that we had thought, and things are staying very steady. So it really is a combination of our on-site success, but also the online success that we are now getting a big share of.
I just wanted to add a little bit with the online, because even obviously pre-COVID, Walmart and Target were already starting that, drive up and they bring the items to you. So people are shopping online and then saying, drive through or drive up and or pick up. So I will say that I do shop mostly now online, and I send my husband to pick it up. Because I remember that comment that you made a few years back, where if you pick it up from the Doherty store, we get to keep the tax revenue.
Correct. If it's something that you're purchasing from your local store, then we're getting it as a brick and mortar on-site sales tax. If you purchase it online, we're not getting that full amount. And so again, when it goes into that pool and everybody shares, we are getting a good portion of that as well. But really getting it right there in the store and purchasing it there, that is the most that we can get.
How about the additional 3/4 cent?
Yes.
That's part of it too.
Yes, so the part with that one in particular is that it has to do with, for example, if you purchase a car, where you register the car, that has to do with how much we get, regardless of where you purchase it. So if you're all buying your cars, you're registering here in Doherty, it's great, we're gonna get that portion of that sales tax, that 3/4 relates to that. However, we have dealerships here. And whereas when a car sales happens, we get that full amount. On the 3/4 portion, the only portion that we get is when it's registered to our city. So we lose in many cases on that, and we'll lose. What's ended up happening is our projections that Dan and I worked on with Hinderleiter and Delamas were very conservative, assuming that a lot of that 3/4, because of the high auto sales portion in our city, would not come in on that 3/4. Our 3/4 has far exceeded our expectations. And so it's not just auto, that's just one example of how it works on that, but on that 3/4, we are getting a very good portion of our community share. So it is a combination of where they're registering those things as well, and again, that has to do with automotive. But clearly, the other sales other than automotive that's coming in on the 3/4 is exceeding our expectations.
Good.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. All right. So overall, general fund expenses are projected to be $273,500 more than budgeted. And when you look at that, to me, of course, $250,000 seems like a lot. But when you look at that we're spending in the $20 million range, it really is a small portion of an increase. And it is a combination of increases and decreases as far as expenses since we projected. And so one of those, I've kind of pulled out the largest ones. Legal services are expected to increase by $160,000 due to the Donahue appraisal contract that you recently approved for the Highland Avenue Promenade. And so you can kind of see just that one approval is almost a good portion of what that increase is. The Charles Abbott Building Inspection Services is based on a percentage of building permit activity. And as we talked about, building permit revenues are so much higher than we expected. Well, a portion of that then gets calculated into what the inspection service costs are. So we have an increase of about $353,000 for that. Next slide. Now, some notable cost decreases that are kind of balancing on the other side. We are having $300,000 in our traffic signal improvements at Buena Vista, Central, and Evergreen are going to be paid in the Community Improvement Fund, because there we have designated City of Hope funds that were contributed to the city purposely for this type of an example, or this type of an expense. So this is an example of an expense that's going to go over and be paid with special funds and therefore isn't going to impact the general fund. So it's a reduction in expenses. The fitness center supervisor, as excited as we are to have filled it, those of us in finance were sort of excited when it was vacant because it resulted in a substantial savings in cost. So anytime we have vacancies in positions, it's not just the salary. You know, you're looking at benefits, you're looking at the retirement, the health care, all of those things. So we saved, 6 figures there by having that position vacant for a while. Well worth the wait, though. And the America's Promise program, as you know, that program transitioned over to the Foothill Unity Center. And so again, by transitioning that over to another entity, we have a reduction in what we had projected initially and what it would cost to run that program. $123,000 reducing in expenses. And then we recently, the City Council awarded the City Hall ADA restroom project. We took our bids and we're working on that project as we speak. That was a delayed project from 2021, and traditionally when you have delayed projects, that will increase your expenses, because I do need to move that appropriation into 21-22. We expected it to be done prior. However, we also have another project, the City Hall exterior paint and fascia project, which we are going to delay until the following fiscal year. So as a result, you have an increase to the expenses and a decrease to the expenses. And as a result, the net impact is a $120,000 reduction in expenses. So you can kind of see how just even the timing of projects has kind of been a positive for us. In the special funds, remember we have about 19 special funds, all different types of unique revenues that get spent on unique categories. Citywide landscape and lighting district, the citywide portion is increasing in expenses as we project for both landscape and water costs by about $36,000. We continue to see, as we all do at home, increases in those utility costs. Neighborhood landscape and lighting, they're seeing an increase in water, gas, and brush clearance costs of about $24,000. A portion of that was approved in the lighting and landscape district assessment that was approved. It was approved after we had already adopted the budget. So there are some categories in there that we look towards those as approval. Yes?
Question, so the LLD is a special assessment for that certain area, right?
So there are 2 types of lighting and landscape districts. The citywide one is assessed on everyone in the city, and it is for the entire city. The neighborhood lighting and landscape districts, there are 10-ish? How many do you think we have?
It's 14.
14. Neighborhood, they have assessments that are only on that neighborhood, and those revenues are only spent on that neighborhood and the expenses in that neighborhood. I've brought them together and summarized them for you.
Okay.
But this neighborhood LLD, it represents about 6 different neighborhood districts that are going to have some increases to their costs.
So their special assessment, on your property tax is going to go up, right?
It does not go up. No, this is all about how we're spending the revenues that we are collecting. And in some cases, these neighborhoods are collecting, having fund balances develop for when expenses are more and when expenses are less. So each individual neighborhood, you guys adopt a levy for that year. That's the maximum amount of revenue that we're going to be able to take in. Then we have to use that revenue, and the expenses are, frankly, what the expenses are. Water might cost more that year, water might cost less that year. And so in this case, we're expecting that some of those will cost more. So they will have to use fund balances and reserves in each of those individual neighborhoods in order to pay for those increases. Then when the next year comes around and you guys are reviewing the levies, that'll get discussed with you. And in many of those neighborhoods, remember, they're limited in your ability to increase the revenues. Some of them have CPI increases in there, some of them don't. So that does become a challenge if certain expenses continue to increase. then we could end up in a situation where they end up in a deficit. But as of right now, these numbers are still pretty small and they can kind of manage them. But at some point, if these expenses start becoming too much, it may be something that we have to consider going back to those neighborhoods and saying, hey, if you still want this level of service, you know, these may have to go up.
Right, or somehow give it back to them, right? They can
Yeah.
do it.
Which has its own complications as I understand it because of the way they were built. But again, yes, that could totally be a possibility. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So SLESF, that's Supplemental Law Enforcement Fund. And that fund is specifically set up for revenues that come in that can be spent on the sheriff's contract. And so the great news this year is that there was some extra funding that got distributed to everybody that gets SLESF, and we received $61,000 more than what we had projected, which is great news because that is a direct offset to our general fund cost of the sheriffs. So you will see not only does this impact being able to use the 61 towards the sheriffs, it's really a savings to your general fund because now your general fund won't have to pay that 61 towards the sheriff's contract. TDA, that is Bicycle and Pedestrian Fund. So just like it sounds like, you're going to use that for sidewalks and for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And so it's a very small amount. It's only about $15,000 a year. So it's been accumulating for a little while. And we will be drawing down the full balance of the $44,000, adding it to the $15,000 for this year, and be using it on sidewalk improvements. And what's nice, again, is that that is a very specialized revenue source that we will be able to then use for projects that have already kind of been slated in our CIP. AQMD, we are funding 3 of our new hybrid vehicles. You'll remember that we are now moving our way into about year 3 of our program, where we are leasing vehicles and then rotating through them every 5 to 6 years. So as we have moved into year 3, we have 3 vehicles that qualify for AQMD funding. Again, nice because it kind of takes specialized funding to put towards those leases. Prop 68 grant, that's the one that Manuel has been discussing with you about the Fish Canyon Trail assessment. So we were granted that, and so $36,000 we anticipate will be spent for that consultant in the next few months before we get to June 30th, so I've added that to the budget. And then in the Community Improvement Fund, just to understand, the Community Improvement Fund often has multiple resources in it. And so anytime we get specialized funds and grants that don't kind of fit neatly into some of these other funds, we put them in the Community Improvement Fund. And so we have funds that, because of the MBK project, were put in specialized just for traffic signal improvements, and we'll be spending those on the Huntington and Highland traffic signal improvements. And then the ATP grant, you approved a contract with Urban Arena, and so again, we'll be using the specialized funds in the Community Improvement Fund for that as well. In summary, going back to the general fund, very positive. Our general fund projected revenues, $23,508,200, and our projected expenditures are going to be $20,101,900. This projects a surplus of $3,396,300. I've broken out what that means as far as reserves after June 30th. And what you're looking at is non-spendable land held for resale at $2.7 million. So that's land that we still hold on to, has its value, but it's not cash. And then restricted. We have restricted for development projects, $2.1 million. Restricted for storm drain projects, $93,000. Restricted for pension costs, these are the amounts that you set aside each year towards pension, $119,000. And then vehicle replacement funds, we have $69,000 left. And unassigned, total amount of unassigned goes up to $18 million. That is the highest it's ever been since I've been here. And I think I joked around and said something about, like, back in the day they talked about the $6 million man. Well, we now have an $18 million man because this is a very substantial amount of unassigned. 89% is what it covers of our expenditures. But again, how we got here, the one-time revenues, all of that, it's a combination. It's not just, because we've been in a surplus of our ongoing revenues every year. So With that, next slide, I'm gonna turn
Question
it over
really
to.
quick.
Yes.
What happened to the CARES Act, all those money? How about that?
The CARES Act.
Or, yeah.
Oh, the ARPA funds?
Yeah, the ARPA funds.
Yes, so the ARPA funds, we have not drawn down on all of those yet, so that's a whole nother $5 million. That is there. The $5 million, we're gonna be discussing that at our workshop that we have tentatively scheduled for
Oh, you waiting for
March.
me to say something?
No, I'm just forgetting the date.
April 26th?
Okay.
I believe it is.
Second meeting in April.
Second meeting in April.
And what we'll discuss there is that $5 million. Once we actually are ready to use it, it gets drawn down. So it's not even showing up here on this table right now because it really is unearned revenue that we're leaving up there. We will show it being drawn down as we assign it to projects.
It's so awesome, but yet at the same time, it's really scary.
Well, that's a perfect segue because when it gets scary, we hand it over to the city manager who will take over the next few slides.
Dr. Jordan.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. And you were talking about the 18 million. I was wondering what that sound would be like with the $18 million man running. I used to make that funny sound on the $6 million. Sorry, everybody, I couldn't help it. I don't want to slather on the good news any more than Ms. Peterson has, but I think it is important to put this in context and then kind of step back a little bit with some amount of caution. You know, as Ms. Peterson said, we have another year of fantastic development-related revenues, yet another unprecedented year. This is our third of those, and
Dr. Jordan, this is mid-year, right? Am I mid-year?
you know, we're at mid-year, but we're projecting out to 3.3 million in those two development-related revenues. Frankly, it's probably going to be more than that. I mean, there's another set of fees that could come in. You never know until they actually come in the door. But this is 3 years in a row where you've had revenues from our City of Hope, Doherty Station that have just really been unprecedented in the history of the city. It's really 3 to 4 times the usual annual amounts, and this is our third straight year. Next slide, please. And then you go to sales tax. And, you know, in 1819, it was about $5.2 million in change. We're now talking about, at the end of this year, doubling that output on our retail sales. Yes, it includes the 3/4 cent, but it's still just incredible growth in a very, very short time. Next slide, please. And then you put those things together, and that shows what you have with our actual reserves at the end of 2021, and if these projections come through, what we're looking at by the end of this year, that $18 million, which is almost 90% of your annual expenditures. So we have really gotten to a great place. We are very, very fortunate. Nobody saw this coming, and we just really hit a good sweet spot. Next slide, please. However, or but, and there is always a but, we do have to keep a couple of things in mind. When the current building boom subsides, and unless there's another one that we're not seeing yet, those extraordinary revenues will go down with them. So very, very suddenly, we could get $2 to $3 million less per year, and that can happen kind of quickly. Sales tax revenue. You mentioned a couple of names, Councilmember Kang, and we have some incredible generators. We're very dependent on a relatively few number of large retailers, which is fine as long as those large retailers continue to do well and continue to stay in our city. But it is a little bit concentrated relative to other cities. And the $23.5 million that we're projecting in general fund revenues this year, 10.5 of it is coming based on retail sales. In times of recessions, retail sales tend to fall very, very quickly. This was a very unusual one with COVID. It wasn't your typical recession. So they're very sensitive to the business cycle. times get tough, they fall more in percentage terms, and then when times get good, they go up more. So we're gonna be having some volatility, given how much of the city's revenues is now tied to retail sales. So all that said, next slide, please. We will, as when we do talk about those ARPA priorities, and that's gonna be a discussion about how to allocate and prioritize really a totally separate $5 million windfall. We will talk a little bit about putting a reserve policy in place, and I'll be bringing that to you conceptually there, and then as we pass our next budget. And then finally, to make sure whatever we do with those ARPA funds, we're very careful about locking in some long-term costs, because remember, they are one-time. So whatever we do, we want to make sure that we do it in a way that we can sustain for the next 10 years and the next 20 years as our community goes forward. That's all I have. Assistant City Manager.
So next
Thank you.
slide. So with that, what we're recommending is that the City Council and as the Housing Authority Board, you receive and file the mid-year budget report, and you approve the budget amendments that are shown in attachment 2. And just to detail that out, what we do is we go through each of the funds, each of the accounts, and we look to see where we do need budget amendments in order to meet our appropriation needs that we're projecting by the end of the year. So you'll see a list of all the account numbers based on the summaries that I've given you that we are proposing to make changes to, reductions and increases to the tune of the total amounts that you saw. And that concludes the presentation, and we are both available for any questions that you might have.
I just have a quick comment. With regard to the retail, I'm gonna say optimistic, even though it's, but we do have, again, Target, Walmart, and even Best Buy, which are larger ticket items. I'm not even talking about the dealerships, but, we're neighboring Monrovia and Arcadia, and they can either go to Pasadena or Azusa. The locations of those retail is right off our freeway.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what's keeping them alive, per se. People didn't necessarily want to drive a distance. And I feel like our quote-unquote big box retailers have been a staple in the community already. So it's built their own customer base that's not necessarily in Doherty. I believe that's why Measure D is as successful as it is, because our city is, smaller. However, the communities that surround us are not necessarily. So, they're purchasing large amounts or large ticket items, or coming every Sunday for the specials at Target and Walmart. But I do know a handful of people who work at both those places, and they feel like maybe there was a pause, but not for very long, considering what, maybe the outside. Shopping is always a thing. I think my son shops at Target like once a week. So I am very optimistic with that. And, if Craig can get Sonic commercials, every couple of months, the permit fees, that's a nice little extra. But when we talked about this Measure D and what the amount was going to be proposed to receive, obviously this surpasses it. And I do still believe in being conservative and knowing, you all keep an eye on a year, 2, 3 years ahead, and I know I appreciate that. And I'll continue to spend my dollars here in Doherty. Anyone else? No? You always do such a fine job. Does anybody want to recommend? Oh, they're recommending to us to accept the budget. So, go ahead, somebody.
I'll
We have
make
to-
a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second, and we'll see you at the budget workshop also.
Yes, I'll be handing that information out to staff this
Right.
next week. So we're going to be starting to work on the budget immediately. So yes,
Great.
I'll see you next at the workshop.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, just for clarification,
Oh,
this was a motion
Oh.
to
receive and file the mid-year budget report, and approve the corresponding budget amendments as designated in attachment 2.
Yes.
So we will need a vote because aside from this receive and file, there is an approval being requested for the budget amendment.
So can I do the whole? We have a motion and a second. Any opposition? So moved.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, we're now on continuation of oral communications. Again, we invite the public, if any, to speak, and these are items that are not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 12, which is items for City Council, successor and agency housing authority financial members, and the city manager, executive director. So I'm gonna start with our city manager.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor Pro Tem. Nothing more from me tonight.
Anything from our city attorney?
No, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna start with Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem. I just want to thank the Wardy Unified School District for the groundbreaking ceremony they had for the new complex that we're gonna have. I saw a lot of friends from high school that I haven't seen in years. They were shocked that I was on the city council. I was trying to get them to call me the Honorable Tony Lewis, but it didn't work. I'd like to thank my colleagues that joined us, the colleagues that couldn't join us. I would like to see, can we get Manuel, I want to thank you for clarifying some misunderstanding about the field. And I called Manny on his day off, and he graciously answered the phone for me. And so I'd like to thank everybody and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. King?
I have nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia?
I just want to say what an exciting season for the city of Gordy. I know we have to think ahead and think responsibly, but it's exciting, and I think we should celebrate. And that's it for me. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe.
Let's conservatively celebrate. Maybe we share a box of donuts. And some coffee too. Mr. Tron?
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Pearson, for putting that together. Always a very well put presentation. That's pretty much it for me. I want to echo Councilmember Lewis. It's being in the city for 35 years and seeing that gym, that tennis court, and that football field now going to be changed into something that is state of the art. Hopefully we'll get a lot more exciting games that we're all going to go to every weekend. Good night, guys.
Great. Ms. Scholes?
I'd like to say thanks to staff for all of the hard work. I'm excited about the CityNet report and about just how on top of things public safety is. So, and Kristen, tremendous report as usual, and Dr. Jordan. Welcome to Alberto. I'm really looking forward to the swim team. He's not here anymore, but just wanted to say I'm really excited about that. And then also, Craig, I think you need, before Amanda leaves, you need to figure out the whole SCE connection, because she has some gift with SCE, I think, so we don't want to lose that. But thank you all. You're tremendous too, Craig. I know you'll take care of it.
Okay, so how about those Los Angeles Rams? That was really, it's probably the first year I've watched the NFC Championships, the AFC Championships, and the Super Bowl in its entirety. But I feel like, I understand Rams aren't from Doherty. However, I mean, with that groundbreaking ceremony for the sports complex, we have had professional football players come from Duarte and play in the NFL. Yes.
I'd like to say we did have a Dory High School graduate that used to play for the Bengals.
For the Bengals, but they
yeah.
didn't win.
No, they didn't. But as you were saying, they represented.
I know,
represented
I know,
Dory.
but yes, Bengals fought a good fight, but, you know, I think in some ways, especially, you know, our city of Inglewood, they've come a long way. And I can, just like us, I feel like I'm reminiscing of back in 2008, when we were strapping our belts as tight as we could and really considering major cutbacks. And this council at that time was like, you know, we got to figure something out. And it was little by little by little. And then at some point, we're like, the residents need to feel it a little bit. But, you know, we were very protective of the programs and services to our residents. So, you know, I think growth, progression, as well as improving, because they'll improve their sales tax base as well with all those visitors. Again, I congratulate City of Inglewood, Mayor Butt, and I think that, you know, LA County would have been able to receive something out of that whole huge party, which, by the way, I did like their halftime show. That was like my music back in the day. So I did get a chance to also attend that groundbreaking sports complex, and I made sure my presence was known, because I'm an athlete as well, from Doherty High School, but it was nice to see quite a few people that I was surprised they remembered me. It was just a nice, humble event. I think they're gonna, and they're expected to open spring of 2024, which, you know, I met the developer builder guy and I go, are you guys gonna deliver? Because you posted on everything, 2024, and, you know, and maybe they cushioned it a little bit, but I feel that it's like a blink of an eye. I was able to also attend the Let's Talk at the Historical Museum. It was outdoors, and the presenters was mainly Barbara Golar from the Monrovia Duarte Black Alumni, Brian Ritchie, who's a community member here in the city of Duarte. His children go to schools here in Duarte, and him and his wife are longtime residents. And Chris Lowe's, who's a media mogul, who has even represented Eminem, of all people, which I thought was kind of cool. And then lastly, I'd like to find out, how do residents kind of reach out to establish neighborhood watches or neighborhood neighborhood watch gathering? So if Mr. Villalobos and or maybe Ada, I realize that the still with whatever's still circling around the community and so forth, that there might be challenges, but I think if it's outdoors, and you know, if the community or those residents are required to wear masks, or, you know, strongly recommended to wear masks, I feel that we give that opportunity and maybe, again, shop around the idea that neighborhood watch. I still believe that it does work, not necessarily having always a block captain, which is helpful because you get certain information, but the neighborhood really does watch the neighborhood. We're not all nosy neighbors, but it's kind of that thing of you get familiar with your neighbors, and I always encourage neighborhood watches for people to get to know their neighbors. A lot of them don't, and probably one of the ones that does, and Jack is like following in those footsteps. He's met the two most recent residents that moved into the city within the last 2 years. So he'll come and tell me all about them and what kind of dog they have, and the other puppy that the other resident has. So I feel like a safe community is one that talks to each other, that sees one another and really care about one another, because I think in areas that you maybe are scared to, is what maybe can put an obstacle in front of you to not be able to reach out as maybe easily as others. But, you know, with that, I just love this place. I feel like, having been here slightly, a little longer, to having to see the bumps and the valleys and everything in between where we are today, I'm like tearing shockingly, but very, very appreciative, because our city staff, we use the word conservative, but it's really for our benefit, because you see that $3 million, surplus, and you're like, oh, we can spend, here, but we're still conscious about our spending and understanding what possibly could be revenues, or, we're always optimistic that business continue to open, small or large, but we're a city that's close to being built out. They've been saying for years we were built out. That's not so, but the fact that we still own land property, granted it's not cash, but there is still land to make some improvements or do whatever for our residents, I think that's wonderful. And so I hope that this council continues that path to support how staff has been really getting into the dollars and cents of it. And, like I said, there are different ways where we support our city, but this one, it really is gonna hopefully fill in some of our neighborhoods with, again, street improvements, neighborhood improvements, but I'm really happy. So with that, I want to mention our adjournment. And I think that's why I'm partially emotional. It's in memory of Daniel Carganilla and Nenita Carganilla. So I grew up calling them Tito Dan and Tita Nitz, and they were both hospitalized about a little over a month ago, and stayed in the hospital from anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks. Tito Dan passed away first, and then Tita Nita passed 7 days later. And so we know their families, we know the kids, we grew up with their kids, and it's just a very sad story. So I just wanted to share with you that they were a wonderful, wonderful couple, but more so, they were like second set of parents for a lot of the neighborhood kids. So you could go to their house, get something to eat, get something to drink, and then play in their yard. And because they were literally like 3 streets above our home, and it's just it's really sad. So every day that you can say hello to a neighbor, a family member, a friend, do it, because you never know. And especially during these times, their families couldn't visit them, and that's where I feel like a little sad for the kids. The kids are now 40 and up, so but we've known them since they were 5 years old and up. So with that, I'd like to adjourn in the Carganilla family, in their name. So I will adjourn the meeting at 9:29. We are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Recording stopped.